Hello and a warm welcome to another episode. My guest today is Benedikt Meuthen, former account executive at Showpad and enterprise account executive at Asana. He then joined Desperate as head of sales and scaled his team from 0 to 15 in less than 12 months.
It's a pleasure to have you with me and today, Ben.
Thank you for having me, Björn. Super excited to be here.
So you scaled the sales team from 0 to 15-ish within roughly a year, and you learned a lot of things. So I'm super curious to dive into as of now, and I would say, let's do it. What do you think?
Do it. Let's jump straight into it.
And you were super honest about sharing some of the learnings recently on LinkedIn. So I would say learning number one, what is on your list in kind of ramping up a sales team to such a decent size in such a short period of time?
Learning number one is data is more important than you think. And if you already know it's important, great, double how important it is. Because I entirely ignored that topic, and I wrote a bit about it, and I share a lot about why I ignored that topic. Because coming into a head of sales role from an AE perspective, my perspective was the only reason why I enter all that data into my Salesforce or HubSpot is because sales operations or my manager asks me to. But there was never a reason put behind it. Nobody ever told me why I need to do that. So naturally, when I built my own sales team, I had no idea why I should do that in the first place. And my thought was, I'm going to do everything better than all the sales leaders that I ever had. I'm going to avoid all of their mistakes. And I figured forcing reps to do too much data entry is a huge mistake. It's a waste of time. Get them in front of customers, get them selling. That's where my focus was. So I was focusing on headcount, on growth, on sales processes itself, but not on capturing any kind of data. And you can imagine how it went from there. Because as soon as I had more AEs and BDRs that I could have physical one-to-ones with every week and actually discuss all their situations, all their talks they're in, I came to the point where I was like, whoa, this is getting too much individual information. I need to condense it somehow. So I started condensing individual snippets from conversations I had on a one-to-one basis into an Excel file, but that wasn't enough anymore at some stage. And also became just way too much work, more than one could handle. And only then did I realize why I was made to do that when I was an AE and why they were picking on me to religiously enter every little detail of every op. Only then did I realize it. But then the problem was it's not just in realizing it, it's also in putting it into action. So only when you realize it, well, it takes another couple of weeks to set up your CRM if it's not set up for that, to capture that data, to train your reps on how to capture that data, to actually give them the why, so to not repeat the mistake that my former leaders made on that. And only then do you start capturing the data. So until you got enough of a pool of data that you can work with, well, that's another 3-4 months easily until you got enough data points so you can reliably say there's a pattern here. So that was such a massive learning and so painful to fix. And I'm really happy I learned my lesson around that.
All right. Yeah. It's not a sexy topic there. And I think it's a super important one. And the other thing you were mentioning as well. So I see a lot of, and I did a similar mistake. So just as a relief for you, potentially, I overstretched it. So when I started ramping up a new sales team, I overstretched it and said, okay, look, I'd like to have these kind of massive amount of data on contact level, on company level. This is on deal level. And I got super fancy about this data without any kind of workflow, any kind of automation, any kind of intelligence to it. So this was also painful because we had the right data fields in the system, but no one was filling it out correctly, or it was kind of super messy along the way. So either way, I think it's super important. And of course, ex post, it's always easier. But what I would be intrigued about is taking all the learnings. If you could just rewind it and start from scratch, still being pragmatic, because from 0 to 15, it's not kind of owning a kind of stable sales organization, very stable business. So what would you do differently?
On that particular point, what I would do differently is probably very early sit together with my colleagues from leadership. So from CS, from marketing, especially from operations, and discuss, hey, in 1 quarter from now, 2 quarters from now, 3 quarters from now, or when we go into the next funding round, what data set do we actually need? What will we be asked for? If we have a plan of stuffing that goes from 0 to 15 within 1 year, what will we need then from a point where I got more than one AE team or an additional BDR team? What will I need to effectively control them? Marketing, what do you need actually? CS, what do you need in data? How can we build that? And I would start with really defining together with the leadership so that it's not an island move that we do, but it's a collaborative move that we do as a leadership together. I think that's super important when you measure data. Otherwise, you got 3 times a different data point, but because it's measured in a different way, it might be totally different numbers. I've seen that before. So I would start with all of us have to capture this data together. We all have to be on board. We all have to agree on what we want to measure, why we want to measure it. And then I would start with much earlier with getting a sales operations working student, which is what I have now. I didn't have that for the entire time. And he's worth gold, absolute gold, because he understands HubSpot, our CRM, better than I do, and he's instrumental to implementing all the data capture in the CRM in the first place. I would hire him earlier to implement the plan, set up with leadership, and then before I ask the reps to fill out anything, I would go with them through the plan and say, this is what we want to do. Here's the big why, and really get them on board, get them around the table. Every new rep, before I ask them to do it, make that part of the onboarding, that they understand that, hey, this is not because we want to control you. This has nothing to do with micromanagement. Matter of fact, most of these fields have nothing to do with measuring your performance in the first place. This is so we can make the right decisions to make you more successful in your job, and make them understand that why, so that they will whether fill these fields from an intrinsic motivation because they know what's in it for them, rather than I just have to do that so my manager is not angry at me.
Would delve down on this entirely. It's such a game changer if you start with the why and then really get this buy-in into it. Because I always see these kind of discussion and AI will fix it, some tools will fix it, out of the sudden data quality will magically increase. I don't buy it, frankly, at least in early stage startups. So what I learned over time, and I'm a huge fan, and at first, and the tool, the team manifesto or working principles, I kind of laughed at them in the first place, but to really have this explicit buy-in that we care about data and that we questioning data fields. But if we all agree that these are important, you have this additional buy-in to get the right data consistently. And I added it to major dashboards. So I have clients who integrated, of course, the classic weekly dashboards in terms of activities, progress, revenue, but there's always a section of key, what kind of data fields is either wonky or missing, to have this alignment in terms of, we're talking about numbers and progress, but we're also talking about data quality.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important to give super practical, tangible examples to your team around that. Like when I talk to my new reps about it now, why I asked them to fill in certain fields. There's a story I tell them about. Earlier this year, we realized we're losing a little bit of traction in run region, where we were losing against competition more often than I saw before. Now, to measure that, I already had set up the right points, but then I wanted data to understand why. Why is that happening? So we went more granular on the lost reasons for that, instead of just saying like, well, no solution required, which can mean everything and nothing. We went much more into details, included drop downs, included free text fields that they just have to fill. They're mandatory now to move a deal into a loss stage. Now, we measured that for about 3 months and came to the point that turns out we already knew that somewhat before, but we didn't have the data to back it up, that it's one particular feature that some of our competitors have that we don't have. That's not actually as tricky to develop, but it was on our roadmap. It was just not prioritized the right way. But that data that we then gathered gave us the amount of ARR that we were practically missing. With that now measurable number, I could go to product, I could directly influence the roadmap, and that product was or that feature was pulled forward from like 7th or 8th in priority to number 1 spot, literally on the day we had the numbers there to support that. Now, development of that went relatively fast and win rate spiked again. which is great for every rep. So I can tell them like, look, there's a lot of process, a lot of filling in dates, a lot that has to happen. But in the end of the day, it's about your win rate. If we get this right, the faster we can act on this information, the faster your win rate goes up. And that's how I explain it to every rep. This is why we ask you these things. It's not to control you, not at all. It's not even to measure performance. It's to get you to win more.
Yeah, it's super insightful and tangible, because one thing is, especially when we deal with legacy, so tracking data doesn't mean that I do not trust you or that I am a micromanager. The other thing is super powerful, because I'm a huge fan of, that kind of aligning marketing, sales, customer success, and product. And early on, so either you do it already, you have the link to product development in your discovery and see, okay, this is kind of a blocker that we do not open up an opportunity in the first place, or you later discover that you're losing deals because there's a feature missing, or there is kind of an upcoming competitor, or any kind of reason. So I think lost deal analysis in a more granular way is super powerful. Picking up on that, because I know HubSpot quite well, the standard setup is not helping you at all. So how did you do it to get this kind of drop down and then the details?
We had to work with two fields. You can't do it in one field. So we tried in the beginning a free text field. Now that was impossible to analyze. That just you just get 1,000,001 data sets, and then you manually have to dig through it. You might as well interview all the AEs why they lost the deal.
It's crazy, isn't it?
So we still started on that. Actually interview the reps for asking for sentiment of most lost reasons that there are, and then you gather a pool of probably 8, 9, maybe up to 12 different reasons that come up. And that's also about the amount that you can put in a drop down before it gets too crazy. If you have to scroll too much in a drop down, nobody's gonna do it, and then they'll just pick other, right? Which is the death of data, is the other field. If you can avoid it, don't include it, right? So that's how we started, but then we still wanted more granularity. So we put a free text field underneath. So now we can filter for first the lost reason. And then if we want to look at a particular lost reason, we can look in the free text on, hey, okay, we lost due to that feature. Now let's hear what they say. On top of that, we now only just very much now in this week start working with conversational intelligence, or recordings of all meetings. So now when we look at the lost reasons and the particular reasons, we can filter for keywords, and we'll be able to look at flywheels of recordings on the particular situation. So literally trimming it down to, in these 30 seconds, we lost the deal. And that will be played back as summed up show reels, you could say, like 30-second snippets of actual conversations had with customers that will be straight going to product. And that's how we will up that. So that's a process we have installed.
Yeah. Wow, this is next level, because I have a client, they started as well with kind of gazillion free text reasons. It's impossible to manage. Rule of thumb for me is not more than 10. Rule of thumb is kind of drop down, because like you're saying, if you have 20, no one will find it, or you will have a strong correlation. The top boxes will be used kind of quite frequently, and then really double down on more details to get as many information out of it. Because the nice thing is, if you see that the second level of detail is missing, it could also circle back to push on qualification in, frankly, I haven't assessed, qualified, or my discovery wasn't as strong as possible, because frankly, I don't know, which is also an indication in improving the sales process, but we might come to this later on.
Yeah.
All right. So number one was a big one. So data and some aspects behind or related to this. So what is another learning on your list?
Next one would be scale over process before you scale over headcount. And that's such an ego topic. And I'm the first one putting my hand up and saying, I'm guilty. I'm so guilty of that, right? Because when we become a leader, I mean, the idea of having a big team, and I'm like, I built that team. Look at all the people on my team. That gets to you. And I think most people wouldn't want to admit it. I'm comfortable doing so. I liked the idea of having a massive team. I liked the idea of having the biggest team on the organization, it gives you something. It does make you proud, and that's okay. Like, that's only human to feel that way. But you got to ask yourself, is that just my ego wanting that, or is that what's best for the organization? And when you answer that question honestly, you'll find out that it might not actually be, especially because it's not cost efficient. The way I learned that, though, was fairly late. In the beginning, I was like, all right, here's the task. We want to grow from X ARR, where we are now, to 5 times that in a very, very short amount of time. So naturally, my first thought went into, well, we need many more AEs to make that happen. Now let me calculate an average of what I can get out per AE. Okay, now that based on that, I have the number of AEs I need. If I just get that, then we'll hit that number. We did that pretty much exactly like I explained it. And that worked beautifully for a while until it didn't. And when it didn't, because numbers were declining and I realized markets change, I need to change processes to do better within the current market that way. And then I realized that changing a sales process that opts for better efficiency is 10x more complicated if you got more reps. So
Yep.
in hindsight, because I know that's going to be your next question, what would you do differently again when you could start again? Easy. I would build a absolute bomb-proof sales process with like 2, 3, maximum 4 reps and get them to nearly perfected. You're never going to reach entire perfection. This is sales. You always grow, you always build, but like I would get them to have like 90% adoption of it, and to have it tested and proven that it works for every rep, not depending on their background, what they've done before, how good or bad they are, that this process is not reliant on talent or individual skill. It's based on following the process and we get to the result. And I would prove that process with only 3 to 4 reps until I have it, and wait with the ARR acceleration. Bite the bullet to grow slower in that phase, so that when you scale and add on headcount in terms of reps, you have a process that actually allows you to scale over headcount. But scaling over headcount, it can work if the process is there before. I just did it other way around. I built, of course, a little bit of process, some basics. I even built a sales playbook. I just didn't fireproof it. I didn't put so much work as I should have into the enablement of it, actually enforcing it. I didn't have the tools to enforce it, or the dashboards to measure how much it's actually being used. I was more focused on bring on new reps, get them up and running, ramp them as fast as possible. And yeah, in hindsight, I would have done it other way around, because then doing it other way around, you gain traction slower, but much faster in the end, rather than gaining it fast in the beginning until it breaks down completely and you almost get to start from scratch. A massive learning there.
This is pure gold. And thanks for being bold and taking your head out of this little bubble. And in your defense, it still is kind of common knowledge that you push hard, especially in sales operation. Building processes is highly unsexy, I would say. And it's one thing is ego, but a lot of VCs also pushing for scale over headcount, really ramp up, hire as fast as possible. And there's I'm not sure if you have listened to there's an artist podcast about a money making machine, and really working on this engine you were mentioning and being patient. And there's one partner, I will really link it to the show notes, is he's saying, frankly, I do not care about whether you get 1 million in revenue or 800. I would be more curious about in understanding what is going on and really build this process. It hasn't to be ideal, but before you hit hard on, like you were saying, on the acceleration pedal, take a little bit more patient in building up a reliable process. And then we are, as investors, are happy to double down in it, because then the race car is accelerating faster, it's stable on the track, and it will get a little month later, but with a proper system behind that. So I would totally agree on this one. And this is, I think it's coming over time, depending on the mentors and support you're having. But it's really great to see that there are other ways in scaling. And the good thing is capital is definitely more expensive than 1 or 2 years ago. So there is a need in process building and smart acceleration, instead of just hiring horrendously amounts of sales reps.
Absolutely. I think we're in the VC space, we're 100% through the board seeing that trend towards cost efficiency in sales and sustainability in all your sales efforts. I think hyper growth is not necessarily the number one desired goal anymore. It still is, but cost efficiency and sustainability in growth is, I think, regarded higher nowadays, which is good. I think that's a positive development. I think that's very,
Absolutely.
very, very healthy. Everything we've done before, prioritizing hypergrowth over everything, well, that's part of the way how we got into the trouble in the first place. I think there's no sales rep, no company out there with a large sales force that didn't have layoffs over the last 3 years. Many companies that I know had 5-6 waves of layoffs by now since 2019 over the last 4 years. Well, that could definitely have been avoided. Plus, there
Yeah.
is certainly an argument to make that I can have two AEs with a bad process making me 100K each a quarter, or I can have one good AE with a good process making me 200K. So it almost equals out if done the right way. So I think that development we're seeing is super, super healthy.
All right, and thanks for putting your ego behind that. I know it's tempting, and I've been in that rabbit hole as well. So, learning number 3.
Learning number 3 was around enablement for me. So we talked about enablement before, and earlier in my career, I started my tech sales career or my SaaS career with Showpad, amazing company that sells a product around the sales or within the sales enablement space. So naturally, they take sales enablement and training for their own reps super serious, and they do an amazing job at it. And I was lucky to receive some of the greatest sales training in my so far career from them. So I knew that training, coaching is very, very important, and I made it a priority of mine to do that with as much time as I can give for it. However, I would say too over optimistic with the experience of some of my reps. So to understand what I'm trying to say, you have to look at the team setup that I entered. When I joined Deskbird, we had 2 reps there who were both with us for, I think, a quarter by then, roughly. None of them two had sold in any other SaaS companies before, so they'd done some sales, but not really in that space. So the majority of what we were doing, or like strategic sales, were rather new to them. Because we're a startup and we can't afford a enterprise rep for 200 something OTE a month, well, we had to look for talent that we can afford, as most startups do, right? So you're not going to get AEs with 5 years experience coming from Salesforce into a small startup. That more likely than not is not gonna happen. So you have to see that you find great driven people, but you're going to prioritize mostly character and drive over skill set that's already there, and that's exactly what I did, and I stand by that until today. However, I ended up with very diverse sales force, people that had learned medic and spice selling, spin selling, and all the nice methodology before, all the way to people who are completely fresh. So I always looked at what kind of training do I want to give them, because I don't want to bore them, and oftentimes separated groups into different learning groups depending on where I thought they were. And I learned in hindsight by the effectiveness of my training that I should have just put everybody in one group and start everybody from zero, regardless of what they've done before. Why did I learn that? Because not that I overestimated the skills of my AEs, not that I'm saying that, but I just found that doing it this way, processes that I tried to implement just took amazingly longer than what I had intended. So sometimes you think as a leader, well, if I only give them the information and ask them to do that, surely they're gonna do that. Well, that's if you just do a training. Then you learn, well, it doesn't just take a training, it takes a coaching. I need to continuously follow up on it. Right, so you learn that. But even then, if you're like, okay, if I follow up over 2-3 weeks, 1 month, then they should have all implemented it. But if you then get to the point where that is still not the case, then you got to go back to the source and say, like, well, looking at my slides, looking at what I trained, did I start from ground zero? Did I start with bare basics here? So if I were to build a sales organization again, that's what I would do. I would start at absolute bare basics for everybody. I don't care if you've been an AE for 2 years already and you come from a cool name company. I'm going to start you at zero. And in other companies, when I was with Asana, when I was with Showpad, they did exactly that. And I was terribly annoyed by it. Again, going from my own experience, trying to do it better than leaders than I had before, thinking I'm so much smarter than them, falling right into the trap, and now knowing why they did it the way they did it. So that's another big learning when it comes to enablement with new reps, with building new teams. Start everybody on the same floor, build from there. Don't count their experience in.
Yeah, I think framing helps. Also, again, start with the why you really building up the base for everyone, and then, like you're saying, it's training is one thing, but training or how do you apply new knowledge, it's never linear. So I'm whether you call it loop learning or multi-touch learning or all the fancy names out there, it's really when it so the beauty is there's new content and or known content, but before it gets sticky, it needs some amount and some touch points of application, and some get it directly, some need some more time, but really have this path of sales enablement. I think it's super important, especially if you deal with such a array of different base levels, and you would like to get them streamlined in your new or kind of adapted sales process. So this is also the good thing about it. If you have them all on the same page, then you really can work as a team, kind of get it continuously in your learning sessions and become better as a whole. So I think this is a super important topic number 3. So
Absolutely.
looking at
I'm sure
time,
you would have told me that. I'm sure you would have told me that a year ago if I would have asked you.
yeah, the tricky part is I'm be very careful not to end up as the kind of old white man who's telling you where to look at. The other thing is sometimes you really have to at least get some experience. So it's much easier to really, if you get these experience, because I think it's also part of the learning experience. So I always try to in an idea what you have kind of these boundaries where you kind of hit that boundary, and of course it shouldn't be kind of total chaos, but it's in the learning space, it's kind of experimental learning. So you really have to feel it, because otherwise it's like learning works. So, but I'm either way blessed that we met within your journey, and then that I could be a part of it, at least a tiny little bit of that journey.
Absolutely, you have been so far for sure. Yeah.
So summarizing what happened until now. So we started with data and kind of the fundamental of building up and scaling up a B2B SaaS business. We touched on process over hiring headcount and really get the process stable first, and then add and accelerate with headcount. And the third one is enablement as kind of a key learning on your way. It's pretty still super fast learning. Is there anything to add from your side, Ben?
Well, last learning, and I'm still. I mean, with all these learnings, I'm still learning, and it's gonna continue. So if we do that same podcast episode we're doing now, half a year down the road, I'll probably have 10 more new points for you, and you learn by your mistakes, but you also learn by reflecting. And one of the things I've been reflecting on recently a lot about is how much time I planned for what area of my job, and how wrong I was with thinking that how big certain aspects would be versus how small certain aspects are, namely or specifically around the people management topic. So when you build up a team in that speed of going 2 reps to 15 reps in less than a year, with every rep that you add, you also add a huge responsibility in people management, particularly if you are in a fully remote company, which we are. My team is split all across Europe. I even had 1 rep at a time working from Sao Paulo, Brazil. So you only see them that often. You don't see them in office every day. You only see them physically 3-4 times a year on summits and meetups, and all the other time is spent in meetings with them. But because you don't see them daily on the sales floor like in other companies, the people management side, staying close to them, and I'm not just talking about a deal review. I'm not talking about reviewing their KPIs. I'm not talking about training. I'm talking about sitting in a Zoom room with them and having an actual conversation. How's your partner doing? Are you all right? Did you recover from that sickness? How's your holidays? Keeping the team together. The average tenure in sales nowadays is short. It's super short. I think AEs stay an average of 2 years. Binding them to the company, binding them to your team in a remote environment is 10 times harder than doing it in a physical environment. So it's employee retention that is part of my job that takes a lot more time than I thought. It's a part that I enjoy, but it's a part that I fully underestimated in time. And also with 15 reps, you can imagine there's always one that has one or the other little problem that you need to attend to. Sometimes people don't get along. Sometimes in sales, people put their elbows out and fight over a deal. So there's a little drama. That's all part of it. In sales, sometimes we tend to be drama greens, including myself. That's just how it
It's
goes.
part of
But
the game.
yeah, it can be fun. But it's my job to manage that, to handle that, to not let certain situations escalate. So combining the people management side with keeping the ship sailing and out of trouble together with employee retention. Um,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
going to be the
super.
first one to admit that takes probably easily a third of my time of the week.
Yeah.
And I didn't know. I thought that's going to be like a half an hour meeting with each
No,
rep once every 2 weeks. It's just not. That's just not true. You take a
exactly.
third out of, you take 20 hours a week. I probably have a 60-hour work week. I'll be the first to admit it takes me 20 hours to keep the ship sailing smooth in terms of team culture. That's just what it is. And I
Yeah,
underestimate it.
extremely valuable extension. So it's not plannable. So I think it's absolutely reasonable to roughly encounter 30%. If it's less, then fine, but it comes
Oh,
in
yeah.
waves. It's
Sometimes
volatile.
it will take up your entire week. If there's a crisis, you have to attend to it. You have to drop everything else, or you lose AEs. You can't afford that.
Yeah, and the another learning I also did, and I think you are on it. So 15 is a too broad of span of direct management, and I think you started that journey in getting.
I got middle management. I got one BDR manager, and the AEs split in two teams, of which one I still manage directly, which is mostly the DACH reps, since that's my home market and the one I worked in for most of my sales career. And then the international reps are managed by one of my AEs. That's an AE team lead going on to become regional manager. As he gets one or two more in headcount in his team, his target decreases down to zero, and then he'd be a full-term manager. For now, it's a team lead, but he takes on very much like the managerial responsibility for that. And that was
Yeah.
a game changer, because I think up until like at the highest point, I had 11 direct reports, which doesn't sound too crazy, but believe me, it is. I would never do that again.
No, I had, I think in maximum times in hyper growth as well, I had 12, 13 in kind of from SDR till customer success, and really vast different roles and jobs was really killing me, and hiring at the same time. So I've been there, and it's a great closing remark. We could go for ages, but it's a really good closing remark. Started with data, then we went on processes, enablement, and finally we still have this kind of, and that's why I love this podcast. Hopefully you as well, and all the listeners. It's about, of course, it's about people. It's kind of, and you're saying it's roughly 30% unplannable in terms of dealing with personal issues, make them happy, retain them, develop them. So this is, I think, one of the additional reasons why the leadership and management is such great profession or passion, because it's the variety is so big. So it has been a pleasure having you, Ben, and I will count you on that you will come back in, I would say, if you grow as quickly as if you have shown it in the past. Latest, we will talk in 9 months, potentially even faster. So it was a true pleasure. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you for having me, Björn. I'll definitely come back. Thanks, and see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.